Perfect.
Go ahead, you're live now.
Hi, I'm Magda Havis.
And I'm Sheena Symington.
We're here today to celebrate the Electrosensitivity Day with you, and we have a short presentation that we're going to share with you about electrohypersensitivity in an electrosmog-filled world, how to improve your environment and benefit your health. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Where is it?
You go down to keynotes again. There you go.
Okay. We're going to be talking about electrohypersensitivity, and these are some of the common symptoms that people experience. One of the most common ones is difficulty sleeping, chronic fatigue, especially if you can't sleep, chronic pain that affects different parts of your body, mood disorders, including depression and anxiety and panic attacks, cognitive disorders, poor short-term memory, difficulty concentrating. Many people say that they have a foggy brain. There's visual disturbances, especially after you've worked on a computer for a few hours, where your vision becomes quite blurry. In serious cases, you can end up having cataracts, since microwaves are known to contribute to cataract formation. There are hearing problems, the most common of which is tinnitus or tinnitus, ringing in the ears, heart palpitations, and irregular or rapid heart rate, and some people claim to have pain or pressure in the chest area. There's a number of skin problems that you can have with this, and excessive nighttime urination, which shows up as bedwetting in children. Now, this is a study that was conducted in Spain by Santini and published in 2001. And what we have here are data for people who live at different distances from a cell phone base station. The symptoms are shown along the top right-hand corner and along the bottom left-hand corner, starting with fatigue, headaches, difficulty concentrating. And this axis shows you the percentage of people experiencing symptoms very often. So those who are 10 meters away from a cell tower, shown in red, experience fatigue. About 70% of them experience fatigue very often. By the time we get out to 300 meters and beyond, that number drops to about 25%. And so you can see here the various symptoms that are associated with electrohypersensitivity. Now, these symptoms are documented here in both black and red. And the symptoms that you see in red are those that we attribute to aging. And very often people who are electrically hypersensitive, who don't realize they're electrically hypersensitive, mention that their symptoms are simply due to the fact that they're getting older. And so I actually call electrohypersensitivity rapid aging syndrome. And the aging is not on the outside, the aging is on the inside. So aging starts with our cells. This is a map of the world from 2004 to 2018, showing the rollout of Wi-Fi. As you can see here with the circles around it in 2004, within 14 years, we've had a massive rollout of Wi-Fi. And that includes other things as well. So we have cell phones, we have Wi-Fi in our home, we have wearables that we have, and we have choices about all of these. But when it comes to cell phone antennas, or when it comes to smart meters or to 5G, we lack that choice. And in my mind, choice is very important when it comes to what you're exposed to. The International Classification of Diseases, the ICD code 10, recommended two different codes for exposure to radio frequency. And this is a medical code for non-ionizing injury from non-ionizing radiation. Code W90.0 is exposure to radio frequencies, and that includes microwave radiation as well as millimeter waves. And code W90.8 is exposure to other forms of non-ionizing radiation. That would include extremely low frequencies, dirty electricity, and ground current. Electrohypersensitivity is recognized as a disability in the United States and in Sweden. And we wrote about this in 2019. You'll notice here on the left-hand side, it's showing you the symptoms again, and it's affecting most systems within the body. Now, there are sensitive populations, some people who are much more sensitive to this radiation. In 2004, the World Health Organization held a meeting in Prague, and it was on electrohypersensitivity. And there they defined the term electrohypersensitivity, and this is their definition: a phenomenon where individuals experience adverse health effects while using or being in the vicinity of devices emanating electric, magnetic, or electromagnetic fields. They go on to say that EHS is a real and sometimes a debilitating problem for the affected persons. Their exposures are generally several orders of magnitude under the limits of internationally accepted standards. So these people are reacting to levels of radiation that are well below our guidelines. However, the World Health Organization didn't like the term electrohypersensitivity, and the term that they proposed was idiopathic environmental intolerance attributed to electromagnetic fields. Now, idiopathic means that we don't know what the cause is. And that's one of the reasons that the World Health Organization didn't want to use the word electrohypersensitivity, implying that the exposure to electromagnetic fields is causing this problem. What we know is that electromagnetic fields trigger the reactions that people get, but something else might be due to the cause. And so we're going to explore what that cause might be. So if we ask the question, what causes EHS? These are some very common precursors for people who experience electrohypersensitivity. If they've had physical trauma to their nervous system in the form of a concussion or whiplash, that can bring on their electrohypersensitivity. If they've had toxic exposures to pesticides, metals, drugs, mercury fillings are a known problem for people who are electrically hypersensitive, because mercury is a neurotoxin and electrohypersensitivity is a neurological disorder. And even the metal in tattoos can affect people. The cause may be electrical exposure, either shocks or multiple shocks or electrocution, lightning strikes, for example. It can also be brought on by people who are exposed for long periods of time to even low levels of electromagnetic radiation. People who have a high parasite load, who have Lyme disease, who have problems with mold, are also likely to develop electrohypersensitivity. And finally, those who have an impaired immune system, whether it's due to an illness or cancer or drugs that people are taking, or the very young or the very old, all of these individuals are more likely to develop electrohypersensitivity than the rest of us. We have empirical evidence about the nervous system and the heart and how they're both activated by external sources of electromagnetic energy. We did a study and asked the question, does radiation from a cordless phone affect the heart? We used a cordless phone that emits 2.4 gigahertz frequencies. These are the same frequencies that we use for Wi-Fi. We had subjects who volunteered to be tested. They were blinded, so they didn't know when they were exposed. And we had Dr. Jeff Marangel, who uses heart rate variability in his clinical practice to look at the results, and he was also blinded as to when people were exposed. Our exposure was for a period of 3 to 4 minutes, and it was at a level of 3 to 5 microwatts per centimeter squared. The guidelines in the United States and internationally are 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. So we were less than 1% of exposure to those guidelines. And here's one of our subjects that we tested. We call this person subject A. There are 3 time periods. We had this person hooked up with a heart monitor, and there were 3 3-minute time periods that you can see here. This shows you the numbers here in red tell you the number of beats per minute. And this person was exposed to microwaves during the second interval and to a sham exposure, which means that the phone was still there, but it wasn't emitting microwave radiation. And you can see here that there's virtually no change in the heart rate of this person. And this is what these blue lines are actually showing, every single heartbeat. This person is non-reactive. Here we have another person, subject B, and this person had a heart rate of 68. We exposed them to microwaves and their heart rate jumped up to 122 beats per minute. As soon as we turned off the microwave, it dropped back down to normal. And then as soon as we turned it on, this is an example of a rapid heart rate that is technically called tachycardia. And there's a link to a video that we provided that shows you the entire experimental procedure and the results that we got. So one of the things that we can say from this research is that microwave radiation affects the heart. It affects it by altering the pulse, and it affects it by affecting the autonomic nervous system, upregulating the sympathetic and downregulating the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, we have some historical archives from Dr. Zori Glazer, who is one of the top microwave specialists in the US Navy and the US government. He worked for NIOSH, the Food and Drug Administration, as well as other government agencies. In 1971, he wrote a very important document. It's shown here. He updated it a year later. And in this document, he cites over 2,000 references and documents all of these biological effects that you can see here. Many of the ones that we have in orange are the ones that we were talking about in this particular example. So we mentioned that it affects the autonomic nervous system, it causes blood disorders, causes biochemical changes and metabolic disorders as well. Another study that we did was looking at live blood. And you do this by simply pricking someone's finger and putting it under a microscope. And we published on this. The paper's called Radiation from Wireless Technology Affects the Blood, the Heart, and the Autonomic Nervous System. And this was published in 2013. This is an example of my blood under dark field microscopy. You can see that the cells are fairly uniform. They're round. They're about the same size. There aren't many particles between the cells, and a few of them are loosely sticking together. This was before I exposed myself to Wi-Fi. After just 10 minutes of exposure to a Wi-Fi that you would have in your home, this is what my blood looked like. And this is called rouleau formation. Now, Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who's an internationally recognized cardiologist in the United States, says the consistency of our blood should be like red wine. And instead, what he notices in his cardiac patients is that it's much more like ketchup. And that's because of the rouleau formation. The cells are simply sticking together. And the consequences of this is that when the blood cells are aggregating, you have sluggish circulation, you have lower transport of oxygen, and you have reduced removal of waste products in the blood. And the symptoms that you might experience include headaches, fatigue, dizziness, difficulty concentrating, numbness and tingling in your extremities, blood pressure problems. And some of the worst things that could potentially happen are heart attacks and strokes. Now, often we're asked is how many people are affected by this radiation and how many people are electrically hypersensitive? In 2019, Michael Bevington wrote this paper, and there he claimed that according to his research, about 30% of the population has mild symptoms, 5% of the population has moderate symptoms, 1.5% has severe symptoms, and 0.65% are so severely affected that they're unable to work. And if we use these percentages for the population in Canada, for example, that comes to 247,000 people who are unable to work because of this sensitivity. In the United States, this has to be a much larger number, There's a mistake here. But if we look at severe sensitivity in the United States, it's about almost 5 million people. Moderate sensitivity, about 16 million people. And mild sensitivity, a third of the population, 100 million people in the United States are adversely affected by this. And for Toronto, with a lower population, the numbers come down. But once again, that number's wrong too. Okay.
They're mixed up.
40,000 people have severe sensitivity. Is EHS a new disorder? The answer to that question is no. It's been around for a long time. It goes by different names. Neurasthenia was what it was called in the 1900s, and it was mostly switchboard operators who were dealing with this. And neurasthenia simply means a weakened nervous system. And we did mention that electrohypersensitivity is a neurological disorder and a hormonal disorder. It used to be called radio wave sickness or microwave syndrome, and that came out during the Second World War when they were testing radar, for example. So the people who were working with the radar developed a variety of symptoms that are virtually identical to what we now call electrohypersensitivity. In the 1980s, it was called screen dermatitis. Mostly women who were working on computers developed rashes on different parts of their body. And Dr. Ole Johansson was one of the key scientists working on this back in the 1980s. As I mentioned earlier, the World Health Organization called it idiopathic environmental intolerance attributed to electromagnetic fields in 2004. And I called it rapid aging syndrome in 2008, which I think represents the types of symptoms that we have when our body is stressed by the environment. EHS is recognized as an impairment in Sweden. And according to Professor Ole Johansson, in Sweden, impairments are viewed from the point of view of the environment. No human being is in itself impaired. Thus, it is the environment that should be treated, not the person. And often when we think of people who are electrically hypersensitive, we see them as canaries in the coal mine. They are actually warning the rest of us that this radiation to which we are all exposed is having adverse health effects. So what do we do? Well, a very important paper came out in 2016 with multiple authors, and this was a guide from the European medical profession for the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of EMF-related health problems and illnesses. And many of the problems and illnesses that they're referring to include electrohypersensitivity. And in this paper, they write, the primary method of treatment should mainly focus on the prevention or reduction of EMF exposure, reducing or eliminating all sources of high EMF exposure at home and at the workplace. If a detrimental EMF exposure is reduced sufficiently, the body has a chance to recover and EHS symptoms will be reduced or even disappear. And the fact that you can get rid of you can change your environment and improve your health is a very important concept that we want to keep reiterating during this presentation. It's one of the most important things that you can do to recover. And so the question is, can people with electrohypersensitivity recover? And the answer is yes, they can. And we've come up with a way that they can recover. And this is something that doctors can help with. We call it R²ID. And the first R stands for reduced exposure. The second R stands for resetting the limbic system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The third letter stands for the immune system. You have to build up your immune system because many of these people are immune compromised. And the final letter in this R²ID is to detoxify the body from the chemical pollutants that you have, as well as from some of the biological pollutants that you have, and some of the food that you might be eating as well. So in one case, you treat the environment, and in the second case, you treat the person. So doctors are very important for the RID, And the first R has to be done by someone who can actually measure the levels in the environment, figure out what people are exposed to, and then simply eliminate that type of exposure. Now, we have a number of recommendations. If it's stationary, wire it. That should be everyone's mantra. So instead of having wireless smart meters, we can have wired smart meters, wired smart appliances, wired printers. So if it's not moving, if it doesn't have to go with you in a car, for example, it can simply be wired. Use wired instead of wireless whenever possible, and that includes your home phone. It includes setting up your computer with Ethernet cables for internet access. And if you're lucky enough to have fiber optics in your community, you'll have one of the best systems for Wi-Fi exposure. Then there are power line adapters that allow you to convert your electrical supply in your home as a form of Ethernet. So once again, you don't have to be exposed to the radiation. It can simply be put on an Ethernet cable, on a fiber optic, or on the electrical system in your home. We know that distance is your friend. The closer you are to the source of the radiation, the higher the levels of radiation. Most studies are suggesting that a cell tower should be at least 500 meters away from your home, from schools, from hospitals, from sensitive environments. When it comes to radar and when it comes to broadcast, I used to think that 2 kilometers was sufficient distance, but I think that's probably closer to 5 kilometers. And depending on how powerful the radar and the broadcast is, it could be even greater distance than that in order not to be exposed to levels that are harmful. Now, the government establishes guidelines, but unfortunately, no one is measuring what the levels are in the environment. And to remedy that, we started an organization, and it's called the Global EMF Monitoring Network. And we started a project, and the project is, Can You Brag About Your City? Basically, what we have are volunteers from around the world who are going out with meters and measuring their environment. They send us the information, and then we color code it, with black and red being the highest levels and amber and green being the lowest levels. And so you can see here on this map, which happens to be interactive, by the way. So if you go to our website, which is globalemf.net, shown at the top right-hand corner of the slide, you can go to the slide, click on any of these different points, and it will take you right down to the street where the measurements were made. And what we're hoping is that by the end of this year, we'll have 1,000 cities around the world monitored in 50 countries. We've got 135 volunteers so far, and we're up to 263 cities in 16 countries as of May 2021. And the website is globalemf.net. Now, who can brag about their city? Well, so far, these are the cities in various countries, as you can see here, from Australia to Canada, Cyprus, Germany, Italy, Japan, Spain, the UK, and the United States, where the levels of radiation are low enough in the cities that you can brag about it. I'm going to turn it over to Sheena.
So there are a number of key issues facing those with EHS, and they include support from family and friends, housing, finding a low EMF, EMR situation in which they can live, which Bragg will help with, medical diagnosis and treatment from a EMF, EHS aware physician. And again, like Magda talked about, the recovery from EHS using R² ID. Some people, one of the barriers to having it accommodated and recognized for people is that some people are wondering if it's a physiological response or a psychological response. And Magda's presented information on the blood and the heart rate variability, indicating that it truly is a physiological response rather than a psychological one. And so important to advocate so we can provide access to those various environments that allow those with EHS to access facilities and public spaces. So again, understanding from friends and family is absolutely critical. No one chooses to be sensitive to this type of radiation. The sensitivity can often lead to social isolation. Just imagine being so sensitive to something that most people are addicted to with the form of a cell phone. It's so important to listen, believe, and support those who are sensitive. And again, we need to advocate on behalf of others with respect to this sensitivity. If you could hear the microwave radiation, this is what it would actually sound like. This is a meter that's used to translate the radio frequency into sound, and this is what the various wireless devices sound like. So this is a Bluetooth and a baby monitor, a Wi-Fi base station, a cordless phone, a cell phone, and the mother's baby monitor. Some homes sound like this. Measuring these devices is a really great way at making the invisible more visible. So again, a number of us have these types of wireless devices in our homes. Well, not all of us do, but some of you do. And what's really important is that each of these devices radiates just like the ones that I just presented. So you want to eliminate these wireless devices from your homes. And you want to really focus on the bedroom. It's so important at nighttime to sleep in a no RF radiation environment. And so really spending time getting a meter, going around your house, measuring these different devices that might be radiating and eliminating them from your living spaces. Another key issue facing those who become electrosensitive is housing and finding safe housing. They really need a low EMF place where there's no cell towers. Once people find that they are sensitive, sometimes they can't escape the radiation within their homes. So they actually have to leave their homes and sleep in their cars or use mobile units in order to still move away from the radiation. We need to have emergency shelters for people who are debilitated by this radiation and in desperate need of a safe place to go until they can find longer-term housing. So right now, there's many people that are actually homeless because of this electromagnetic exposure. And there's even further complications with respect to COVID because all of the bathrooms and showers in camping facilities have actually been closed. Hopefully that won't be the case this summer, but they're like EMF refugees. They really have very little spaces to go. And again, that's why the BRAG project that Magda has created is so important, because we need to find these low EMF, low RF areas and maintain them in order to provide safe housing for those who are EHS. How to provide access for those with EHS. We have a duty to provide the accessible infrastructure. So we need to work with communities and have them site cell towers in areas that really create low EMF exposure regions, those green regions. In Peterborough, the city of Peterborough has electromagnetic hypersensitivity tip sheet in order to accommodate those with EHS in a meeting environment. In Ontario, we are obligated to have a fully accessible Ontario for everyone with a disability as of 2025. So again, it's really important to work together to create these low EMF, EMR places to accommodate and provide access for those who are EHS. We've been successful at having those with EHS accommodated within a hospital setting, both in an emergency setting, as well as a PET scan and CT scans and that kind of thing, diagnostics, as well as inpatient care and cancer treatments. So it's really important to inform these hospitals, and they're incredibly responsive at working with us in order to provide access to hospitals with those with EHS. And again, this is achieved quite simply. Just as we have a non-smoking environments, there literally are non-wireless environments. Turning off Wi-Fi, turning off your cell phone, and wiring the Ethernet connections, like Magda was saying, through shielded Ethernet cable or fiber optics. And we really want to encourage communities to have fiber optics to the premises. There are a number of resources here that communities can use to actually provide wired access to their communities. And Reinventing Wires is an amazing document, The Future of Landlines and Networks. So again, providing solutions on the how to have a wired, safer, faster internet access for all. And we need to stop. And if it's not us wiring and providing a safe environment, then who's going to do it? And if it's not now, when will it happen? So it's so important to have the Bragg study show us where those low EMF RF areas are and to be able to maintain them as soon as possible. And again, this is the Electrosensitivity Sensitive Society website. And we provide support for those who are EHS and for their families as well. We have a weekly support group for helping people who need to be accommodated within their work environment, within their school environment, within their hospital environment. So you can contact me, Sheena, at electrosensitivesociety.com for more information on any of that, on how to help those with EHS.
Thank you.
Great. So do you have any take-home messages, Magda?
Well, the most important take-home message is you should know what you're exposed to. And one of the best ways to do that is to get a meter and to measure your environment.
Right here.
We happen to have one of the meters here. It's called a Safe and Sound Pro. There are less expensive meters. This isn't the one you need to get, but there are less expensive meters that are about $200 or so that you can just take around your house and turn it on and find out what you're exposed to. This one has different colors and it's showing our exposure right now, which is quite high.
Wonder what's going on. Yeah,
here.
that's right.
Okay. But by having one of these meters, you know when you're exposed to something within your own home or from a neighboring home, for example. And you can actually get closer to the device and the levels will go up so you can determine what in your home might be causing the problem. And so by measuring your home environment, making sure that it's electromagnetically clean, that's one way to protect yourself and your family. And we call this electromagnetic hygiene. We know hygiene is really critical, wash your hands. We've learned this obviously with COVID, but we knew it before. We constantly tell our kids to wash their hands, especially before dinner or something. And this is just another form of hygiene. We don't want to be exposed to toxic chemicals. We don't want to be exposed to other types of toxins in the environment. And microwave radiation is a toxin in the environment.
And just like you demonstrated, it's important to actually monitor your environment because 99% of the time it's a flashing green in this room. So what is happening in this environment that's contributing to that not being a flashing green? So not to induce concern or not to create fear, but just to be knowledgeable about what is in your environment and then take the steps to remove the radiating sources and really reduce your exposure, particularly in that sleeping area. So like Magda said, it's a great tool for education. And I know CC Doucette has been really successful at getting these into libraries so people can rent them out and people can measure the environment. And this is the same meter that's being used in the Bragg study. If any of you want to participate in that, you can get this meter and measure your city and see if you can too brag about your city.
It's also very important to protect children. I'm very concerned about Wi-Fi in schools. It's the craziest thing to put microwave radiation in the classroom and expose children, their teachers for 6 to 8 hours a day. It just doesn't make any sense to me, especially when you can do it in a wired fashion. Now, there's so much, because of COVID, so many of us have been doing Zoom meetings rather than live conferences. And if you look at any of the platforms for this type of interaction, they're recommending you not use wireless. They recommend that you use a hardwired system because it's much more reliable, it's faster, it's safer, the connectivity is much better. So even the platforms that are recommending that you use something to communicate with a broader audience outside of your own place of work or your home are recommending wired solutions, not because of health, but because it's a better system technologically.
Yeah. And Magda has a YouTube channel where she has a number of videos that give you lots of information from all sorts of perspectives. So it's Magda Havas YouTube. And she also has her website, magdahavas.com. And here at the Rose Lab, theroselab.com. And my website is electrosensitivesociety.com. And you can get tips on electromagnetic hygiene, how to wire your individual devices. A lot of people don't realize that they can use all of those wireless mobile devices in a wired fashion. You sometimes have to get a couple of little adapters to plug it into the Ethernet cable, but you put it into airplane mode, use this adapter to plug it into Ethernet cables, and you don't have any wireless radiation exposure whatsoever. So those tips are so important at helping you reduce your exposure. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.